Okey dokey. Land use and planning, June 24th. Did you receive the minutes from Cinta? I think she sent them late last night.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't,
Okay.
well, I did not look.
We will wait to approve those
Okay.
till our next meeting
Okay,
then.
thank you.
'Cause I think it's only fair that you vote on something
Yeah.
you've read.
I thought I checked my email, but I was looking at the
I
capital
know
improvement
she
plan.
sent me an email late last night, saying that she didn't have your email. I didn't actually read that until this morning.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not sure, I was hoping that maybe it got to you somehow, but,
And I'll double check. I'll let you know afterwards. When I have
Sounds
my
good.
phone. Thank you.
so growth policy review, that is up for action this evening. I don't know if you have had an opportunity to read through the growth policy at all?
Part of it, yeah, at least half of it, but I take responsibility for this, over the last year when you guys were having the meeting stuff. I was not involved in any of those meetings
Okay.
or discussions. I have not looked at those minutes.
Yep.
And so I don't feel,
Yeah.
knowledgeable enough to, I mean, I read what I did read through, I had some questions on, but,
Yeah, and honestly, tonight will be a good opportunity for those.
okay.
So one thing with the growth policy is this is actually the first that the council is really discussing it
Oh,
and
really?
doing anything with it. So
Okay.
it all comes from planning board.
Yeah.
So growth policy was all put through together with planning board. We had sent out the final draft to all of council, over a month ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, just for review, so that way if questions did come up,
Okay.
we could talk about it, and if there's anything that the council feels needs to be amended or wants the planning board to look at, we can still do that.
Okay.
Don't feel obligated to move forward with it if there's something that you don't feel comfortable with. So,
Okay, I trust your guys' judgment
yeah.
from what you guys already know.
And again, I think they did a really thorough job. I was a
Mhm.
part of that, like, halfway through.
Oh, good, okay.
And so on a whole, I think there's a pretty thorough job. There's a few things that I think could be a little bit better addressed.
Uh-huh.
But I have a feeling that will probably come up this evening with Jody as well.
Yeah, she
and-
mentioned a few things.
Yeah, there's a few things, and I don't think it's anything super substantial. Across the board,
Mhm.
the growth policy is pretty well put together. And I think specifically, the most important thing is to remember that the growth policy is essentially how the planning board makes decisions, changes zoning, focuses on zoning. It's basically the goal and the model for how we're moving forward with any sort of development within the community. So that's really the good scope to put it on and a good
Okay.
lens.
Great.
Just kind of keeping that in mind. It's also something that developers, people moving to the area, they'll look at that growth policy and just kind of see if it aligns with their own personal values.
Great.
So that's just something to kind of put that lens over it, and, yeah, that should help a little bit.
And they've been, go ahead. No, you go. You had your hand up before.
Madam Chair, Mike, how do you anticipate this going tonight? And then I can share my guesses or insight or I can do that if you prefer.
How I see it going tonight, is presenting it, opening it up to the table, and if there are questions from the council of certain items, looking at those specifically, and then potentially taking those back to the planning board.
Okay. I was gonna say, my general feedback from council that I've collected is that I don't know that I anticipate this passing tonight. I think what's gonna happen is Al's got a presentation he wants to give, and he'll
Great.
kind of give from a planning board perspective. But I've heard from 1, 2, 3 council members, I think that there are some specific smatterings throughout that council would like to have struck, and I
Yep.
think those can either be struck by council, they don't necessarily have to go back to planning board.
Right.
Or they may send it back to planning board and say, we want you to go revisit these areas
Right.
and do that. So that's kind of what
That's kind of how I was picturing it
Okay.
too. It depends on what scale, because again, if it's just remove this, remove that, that's one thing, but if you want a rework, I feel like that requires more time and requires doing something outside of an amendment.
Okay, I will, follow up with Al prior to tonight.
Okay?
What I don't know, I have a suspicion that if we end up bringing it back, that it's another public hearing, which means we probably also need to notice it.
Mhm.
we ought not to make the decision based on whether we have to spend another couple $100 for an ad. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
But, that was, I just wanted to know if that was your sense.
Yeah, that's my sense as well, just from.
And I guess I don't know between those two choices. Are these things we're gonna strike this, and that, or are we gonna say revisit these
And
areas?
again, I think it just depends on the conversation with the rest of the council and having that, especially if Al will be here this evening. I think that will be helpful to be able to ask him his thoughts and opinions on it.
Okay.
To where he can provide like, well, this is why we did this, or also saying like, we don't mind if you take that out, but if it's something that he feels strongly about or feels like it does need additional rework from the whole planning board, I think that's when it would go back.
I think where he's gonna come from is we've got an awful lot of effort in this.
Yep.
If you're not gonna take our input, why do you ask? There's gonna be some frustration, and that's
Oh, I'm
something
sure.
we're expected, and,
Yep.
and so I think have a sensitivity to that, and
Agreed.
I will prep.
And I think where some of my frustration lies with it is, I've been hearing about this week, where I have been preaching to the council for the past 2
You
months
have, yes.
to provide input prior, so that way they didn't have to go back and rework it.
You have said that every meeting I've
Yeah.
been to, so I appreciate that.
So again, I'm hoping that it can just be a quick, we want to strike these items. And then if we need to, we can put it up for a vote the following week, and it doesn't have to go back to planning board. But if it does escalate, then it might have to. And I don't see it going that way, but I'm not
First option, yeah.
I'm not saying it's not an option. I'm not saying it's not gonna potentially happen.
But so what you're saying is I heard 3 options then. 1, remand it back to planning board with the following guidance. 2, no, we're not sending it back to planning board, but the changes we're gonna make are gonna take us a week to implement them in there.
Right, I
And
think
so we'll
it's,
bring this back next time. And then the third is if they can just be short changes tonight and then pass it tonight.
Right.
So that's 3 variations on that.
sure, yep,
And, yeah, the things, from what I've read, mine are just
yeah,
quick, easy, just getting more backstory on it, and
Yep.
nothing drastic or anything. It seems like there was a lot of thought put into it,
yeah.
very broad
It went,
overview.
the planning board went through it line by line multiple times.
Yeah.
And
it looks,
So again, I think across the board it's a solid document, but I do think that there's some additional,
I think the concerns that I've heard that are the most concerning are things that were implemented rather strongly, and the council feels without direction from council to include those, and that they did, and we don't like them.
correct.
right, the council's, role in, or responsibilities, it seems.
Yeah.
Okay. That'll be great, the presentation tonight,
Yeah,
'cause that'll
I think
help
that will
give
be
a
very
backstory
helpful.
and-
So again, didn't want to dig into it too much now, because I could go through it line by line, but
Yeah.
I don't think we have necessarily the time for that. So we'll get into the resolution setting provisions for the use of Pride Park. We did take this back, I took it back and tweaked it, then I sent it to Dennison. I am not happy with what Dennison sent back. And I apologize, because the way he had wrote his email, it made it sound very minor, but then when I actually went through and read it, I was not very pleased with. He essentially added 3 whereases that, to me, is off base.
And if you just wanna strike them and move on,
I
then
think that's our intention, I just want to
Okay.
address it here, so.
No, I was gonna say, or if you wanna wait and do, if it's revisited, is that all he did, was add the 3 whereas?
He
Are
added,
they the ones that all caused me to scratch my head?
yeah, probably. So specifically, those 3 whereases, I had updated the whereas ordinance 960 as amended, specifically identifying what the process and what the purpose of ordinance 960 is. I think that was a recommendation from the public, and I thought that was a solid recommendation. And then he added the 3 whereases that, again, not super thrilled about. The city of Red Lodge determined that granting event permits for Pride Park will unreasonably burden the city resources, which is not accurate, that are necessary to preserve the public's use of this area. So that, again, wasn't realistic. It's not at all why we did this. Then also, the city of Red Lodge has determined granting event permits for the Pride Park will present a substantial and unwanted noise and traffic hazard, also not why we did this.
Okay.
And then the third whereas, city of Red Lodge determined that granting event permits for Pride Park may unduly impede, obstruct, or interfere with the operation of emergency vehicles or equipment through Main Street. Again, none of these three reasons were reasons that we did this.
Okay.
And I think what he had mentioned in his email, the reasoning he had put those in there, is those are reasons that we would generally deny event permits in ordinance 960, so he wanted to make them
Oh,
similar, or like make those reasonings the same as why we would generally say no or deny an event permit.
There was another whereas I saw that said something about First Amendment, this, that, or the other, and I had questions about the wording or the value, because to me, it's a separate,
the fifth,
Oh, yeah, so
Whereas-
it'd be the fourth one above that. And again, he also added that one in. Red Lodge recognizes the space for, the need for public space for lawful picketing and for public to express differing viewpoints. And I don't mind that one as much, because we do recognize that, and that is one conversation but that is one conversation that has come from this resolution where we have had citizens concerned that if we did this, that they would no longer be able to do that. And end of the day is that is not at all our intention, so I think it's good that we do address that within our whereases.
oh,
Does that make sense?
or is it a therefore this does not impact?
I mean, end of the day, we don't have to have it, it's covered in 960.
Okay.
But I think it is nice to have that there for, just to alleviate any confusion or frustration from folks that want to be able to use that space for lawful picketing or, expressive use. So-
yeah, I feel like they were pretty sensitive to it.
Yeah. So I don't mind it, again, it's not necessary, but that is part of the process that we have had with this conversation around this resolution. So that's the only reason I'd be willing to leave that one in, whereas I would remove the three other whereases.
Obviously.
He also did fairly much, let me pull up my original, he did change the actual, therefore it be resolved, and apologies while I find this real fast. I have about 15 different edited copies of this document at this point.
Thanks for all your hard work on it, so,
Not right until it's right, and I'd rather take the time to do it right.
yeah, okay.
Easier to find it in my email.
I'm gonna add to my note, actually, I could print my, I'm gonna say, for tonight, what I'll do is I'll hand out to council your latest version of that.
Okay, that'd be great. I think that's helpful, just to be able to read it.
Do you want me to read it? I think, is it the one that says that in addition to the provisions from you?
Yeah,
This
that would
one-
be it.
okay.
Yep.
So you had, I think in the last version, now therefore be it resolved by the city council of the city of Red Lodge, Montana, in addition to the provisions, rules, and restrictions contained in ordinance 960, there will be no permitted use of Pride Park.
Yep.
And then his just read,
No event. What did his read? I gotta pull that back up again, sorry. So many documents.
and I have it,
Okay. Resolutions. So many resolutions. Okay, here it is. So he just says no event permits will be issued for Pride Park. And again, end of the day, that's not that big of a difference or change to me, so we could leave that. Mine was just wordier, I suppose.
well, I like that it references back to 960, but,
I guess we do that currently
Well-
in,
the first,
yep,
I think the first one.
in the whereas. So it's, and I think it's important, though, like, no event permits will be issued, but I think we're kind of making that into addition. I think that's actually why he removed it, is because it's not an amendment, it's a resolution. So I'm fine with keeping that section.
Okay,
I do want to remove those three whereases.
okay,
We'll
keep,
and so I will send you that copy right after this. And then that way we can have that printed for the council.
Just for comparison, side by side, you keep
Mhm.
this
And
one,
just-
strike that one.
It makes it really easy to make that amendment, and we can move forward with it. everything, I look over to the audience, because you're here.
Yes, I am again.
That's good.
Yeah, just to be clear, so you're moving forward on making
Respite Park.
Pride Park a respite.
Yeah, it's just,
Okay.
it's no longer going to allow for any event permits. So, anything that's covered in 960 as an event, so if you're taking money, receiving money, selling booze, have over 75 people, none of that will be allowed. Anything that would generally require an event permit, will not be allowed in Pride Park.
And I think that'll be important to clarify tonight, because that does talk about, quite frankly, if it's a permitted protest, but it's in excess of 75 people, you need to have it someplace else.
Mhm.
That's good.
Is there a place that I, as a citizen, could
Yep.
read what Amendment 960 is?
So 960 is an ordinance. You
Okay.
can find it on our website.
Okay.
Gosh, and it's, I think the best way to find it,
If you want to stick around after the meeting, I can show you how you can get to it really easily.
There we go.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
And in fact, I can probably print one off in the background and hand it to you as you
Okay,
leave.
whatever, yeah.
Yep.
Sure, thanks. Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Ron.
Just as a question of
Mhm.
curiosity, in the past, that street adjacent to Pride Park has been closed for
Mhm.
special events,
Mhm.
which it would still be available to be closed for special events.
Yep.
What happens when the participants flow over into Pride Park,
It's just,
taking their lawn chairs and setting up lawn chairs?
Don't
and
take
hanging
money.
first come, first serve, you're welcome to do
out?
so.
Right, I just, because, the car show used to headquarter there, they don't anymore,
Yeah, correct.
but,
Yeah, so again, that's kind of the bummer with this, is by doing it this way, there are no guardrails on how that space, it's first come, first serve. So if someone wanted to set up lawn chairs and have a picnic, they could. That's kind of nature of it.
right.
Yeah.
I do have another question. So when you say money can't be exchanged,
Mhm.
the only thing that we do in Pride Park, is our annual
It
fundraiser.
doesn't apply to
You would
guys.
you would still be protected under 960 for the
Okay,
MOU.
For the MOU.
Yep.
Perfect, okay.
Yep, because you guys don't have to get a permit for that anyhow, so you're good.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
So, yep, you're exempt. The other thing that I think is worth addressing, I don't know if we have any current events, I'm sure we do, already booked up for this summer.
We do, and once you guys pass something, and they were informed at the time
Okay.
that it could potentially change, and we will just refund all their monies, including the 25. We will just,
I know specifically, Festival of Nations tribute this weekend, street dances, bake sales.
Good.
They have several things that are supposed to be happening this weekend. Is there a timeline that this goes into place? Is it immediately in action when we pass it?
For 30 days.
Because I don't necessarily want to be that guy.
so what you could do is you could change the
Good
therefore and include a date and say this goes into effect and make it after this weekend or 30 days from now or something, so that
Okay.
You feel
you
comfortable.
could add that as a
I think
therefore.
that's fair,
Yeah,
because that would be really,
Thank you for
Yeah.
thinking.
I
of
have
it.
words, but.
We wouldn't want
Is the
money
festival
there.
closing the street there?
No, they're not closing the street. I don't believe they are. But they have like live music there this weekend. They have a bake sale. They have, yeah, like all things that they did have to get permitted for. And I know like, you know, realistically, the Arts Guild with the Art Walk, I don't think that would necessarily qualify for a permitted event, having it, giving out information and having their setup as long as they're not taking money.
Yeah, as long as it's not in that 960 stuff.
Yep, so,
I didn't remember that we had updated that since I've been here, but we have one from September of last year, so probably.
yeah, we did. It was mostly,
That has my signature on it.
it was specifically setting the difference with the applications for 75 and up and
Oh.
75 and lower. That was what we had talked about. So, okay, I think that we do add a date to that as well. I'll make that change,
Thank
just
you.
because, again, that would be real rude.
Yeah, right.
It could even be like July 1st.
And that's kind of what I'm thinking, is
Yeah.
like literally let them get through this weekend and,
Yeah, no, I agree.
yeah.
That's great you knew that information, that.
I've been paying a
About the
lot of
Festival
attention
of
to Pride
Nations.
Park the last 6
Yes,
months.
Thank you.
So,
Respect
yeah.
for them.
So yeah,
Okay.
we will let them continue on with that, because again, I just don't want to be that guy. Resolution number 3703, approve exchange of real property near the airport road. This is specifically that little square chunk of land that's on an island, in the city park space, for the exchange of that city park space that runs adjacent to Airport Road and the O'Neill driveway. So, we did have discussion on this
Mhm.
last week. I feel like we made some tweaks to that, and I hope that, I think across the board, everyone's pretty happy with it, from what I understand.
I think Sandy was looking at it I think she was looking at a different piece of property, so I think I'm looking forward to it. And if you guys need more time, take more time, but I think we've got everybody on board.
Yeah, I think that she had the same concerns over legal descriptions that I did, but I think we addressed that with how it was written.
She was just looking at different legal descriptions and saying, these aren't the right legal descriptions, but I think she got it straightened out. But if you get a chance to talk to her before
Okay.
tonight, you guys make sure you're on the same page.
Now, I'll just let her do it tonight, that sounds great.
Did we, I think someone had a question on how both pieces were zoned, was that already
Yeah.
determined?
So I think that was also a concern, so they're both zoned, okay, let me pull up the zoning real quick.
Stamp is currently zoned commercial, everything else is zoned parks.
It's
Okay.
C3, isn't
Public.
it?
Yeah, the
So
one
it's-
posted stamp is C something.
Yeah, so it's community entrance, not even just commercial, so it's community
Okay.
entrance, which is a mixed residential commercial use.
Okay.
So, but then the other portion is park space zoning.
Okay,
The only concern I have with that is if and when I imagine he will, he'll probably resurvey that lot and try and merge them, which that would probably come to planning board, then council, that would require a rezoning. Because I would imagine he would probably just add that sliver to his current lot, which is R3.
If I were a betting man, I would bet that he will not, just because you can't undo it once it's done, and the idea that he could sell it separately if he ever decided to, why give that option up?
I think he'd just rather have that lot as an R3 lot.
And
And a bigger
but
lot.
that's a rezoning thing, and like I said, that'll be done, they're already looking at that separately, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to.
So yeah, that'd be the only thing that I could think of that would come up, is if he were to merge those. And then that would then essentially change the zoning of that to R3, but again, that would have to go through planning board, I believe, so.
okay.
Okay, so that's pretty much it for that one. Let's go back. God, we're just crushing this. So, number 5, resolution to set a process for the change of use or adding permanent structures, attachments to public property. So this is a much larger discussion.
Probably 2 or 3 meetings worth.
Oh, God, this is gonna be 6 months, let's be realistic. Sorry, Dave.
Okay, that's all right.
But let's be realistic, like, so specifically, where I wanna kind of start this, so we need a resolution for setting the process of use or adding permanent structures. So currently, what do we have at the city, like within our ordinances and our current resolutions, for processes specifically with MOUs, specifically for use of city land? Like, I know we have our events permit and our events ordinance, but what other city use, wouldn't that be Article 8? If I'm remembering correctly?
The only thing that comes to my mind as I look at it is, dedicating parks and specifying a use.
Okay.
Let me go into public ways and public property, which is Title 8,
Good job.
in, adoption of standard specifications. Let me join the meeting really quickly.
Because again, I think that's gonna help us kind of, one, guide specifically, if we already have something in place, don't really wanna just be doing something contradictory to it. It'll help us kind of guide what we do have in place and what needs to be added to that.
Okay.
And then it's also gonna address any issues that might have to be corrected within those places too. Because again, this is a much larger discussion than like, oh, you can do X, Y, and Z. Like, there's a lot of places where this affects that. So
Okay.
that's part of the reason I really want to make sure that we know that baseline before we even try to add to it.
Okay, that's great. So for the next meeting,
Yeah,
like study the Title 8.
that's kind of what I'm thinking, is we just have a homework assignment.
Yep.
And let's find it now while we have our meeting time. And then from there, we can continue to like actually, okay, we have this X, Y, Z, let's make this resolution that's cohesive with all of it.
Okay.
So, I'm looking through Title 8.
Give me a second and I'll share it.
And what is the problem the resolution is going to solve?
So essentially what the issue is, from what I understand, is we don't have a solid process for when someone has an MOU or wants to utilize city-owned land to create a community asset. Where does that ownership lie? Whose responsibility is this? Is it coming through a grant? Is this now the city's, or is it this organization's? So, and also just creating that process of, is it okay for them to do that? Does it hit these values? Does it hit, does it fit with what we actually want to see that space being used for? So again, and I hate always having to go back to the observatory, but that's, I think, what really started to drive this, and now we have other things coming down the pipe that realistically we need to have this in place for.
So for instance, the ice rink, if they put in a permanent slab inside of Pride Park,
Mhm.
that's a
Or
discussion
Lions
that's
Park.
big enough that warrants having to go to city council. But we don't have documentation anywhere that says that's what it's going to do. Putting in tennis courts up by Coal Miners Park, that's some land that's currently open land. And we have different groups that are vying for that. Disc golf would like to be there, tennis courts are like, so it's kind of, these are basically public assets, which falls within council's purview to find how do we make sure, and what is the triggering point when it gets there? Is it a change of land use from something that it was before? Is it a permanent structure? Those are the two things that have been kind of highlighted as trigger points coming into it. So then it's gonna come to council, there'll be a resolution, there'll be a vote. Yes, we're gonna put an observatory in this park.
Mhm.
Yes, these are the conditions that are gonna exist. Yes, we're gonna rip up Lions Park and put in, an arena. Yes, we're gonna rip out Pride Park and do something entirely different with it. We're gonna put a public bathroom on Broadway that'll be over on the end of Pride Park. That's basically use of public land. That's something that, you know, like I said, so far, if it's a change of use, or if it is a structure, therefore there's lasting implications of it, it ought to go through council, it ought to have a public hearing vetting, people ought to be able to put their comments in and say, no, we don't want you, and by the way, I don't want to start any rumors, because this is
Yeah.
not where it's going for financial
I can
reasons.
feel the tension behind.
No, this is, but let's make
Right.
Lions Park a covered park. So, that's a valid conversation, but what is the public vetting that needs to be there? So the problem to be solved is to make sure that we don't do stuff specifically with parklands, public lands, without making sure that the public has an opportunity to be heard and vetted before council makes a decision.
Right. So essentially, like the observatory, to a certain extent, they now have ownership within the park.
Actually, they don't.
Okay.
No, and that's also part of the concerns, is when does it become a land lease and when does it become just an MOU and you have a building here?
Right.
Because now if they back away, that's the city's responsibility to maintain.
Or if the city decides they have a higher and better use for that property,
Mhm,
that they have an exit clause from the MOU,
mhm.
and how the
Again.
permanent structures are disposed of.
Yeah, this is a very large
Yeah.
conversation. That's part of the
But
reason I'm like,
important.
it's not just
6
two
months,
meetings.
yeah.
And you see groups trying to gain, for lack of a better term, ownership of certain areas, disc golf,
Mhm.
they keep getting pushed, and now they're trying to put a stake in the ground and say, we're here, we're not leaving.
Right.
Which is understandable because they had it all to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of were squatters on city property, enjoying it.
Yep.
It wasn't causing any problems, but now it's starting to conflict with other uses that the city has come along and approved.
And, go ahead. No,
Oh.
I'm curious what you guys,
Well, just looking at the capital improvement plan, some of those things are in the priority list for 25 to 28, 29, so it'll be good to have that in place because it's in
yeah.
the capital improvement plan.
And again, this is gonna be a pretty
Oh, that's-
substantial, and this is where some of my concerns come from too, is we also need to look at our MOU process. And so again, generally, when you start to get into something like this, it does tend to branch into multiple
More,
places
yeah.
where it needs to be fixed
Okay, good.
or clarified. And again, that's
Mhm.
where my concern is. I don't wanna jump in with a resolution saying, oh, this is your process. But if you do it this way, you don't have to do it that way. Like, it covers a very large gambit of what we're looking at. So that's, I think, so again, looking at, Title VIII, I'm trying to figure out,
There's actually Title 8, Chapter 8 even too, use of city-owned land,
perfect.
permit required exemptions, application review process.
See, I think that's,
I wonder how much stuff we already have that we just weren't aware of.
and that's exactly it. It's like, let's dig deep, figure out what we have, and then from there, figure out what's needed. Yeah, so purpose, let's pull that up.
And would the planning board be involved in this?
And that's exactly it. It's like, when's the planning board involved? When's the, Parks board involved?
Yeah, okay.
Like, so again, there's other players too that would have to probably play by these rules and be informed of these decisions.
And we can have separate meetings, we can schedule in between meetings.
And it might be the way that a lot of this would work, depending on what they're trying to do. Like, in the gravity of what the project is, it might be that they have to get, Parks board approval first, and then it goes to city council.
Okay.
And then, or it goes to planning board first, then it goes to city council, again, depending on the gravity and like what's involved with that actual development. So like, for instance, I come in and I wanna put in, I wanna donate 20 park benches to the dog park. And instead of me just going and putting them there, like, what does that look like in terms of the process through the city? Because it is city-owned land. Someone at the Parks Board might be like, those are, I mean, it might be ones that I made myself, and there's nails and crap sticking out of them, and like,
Yeah, they
or
could
just
have
poorly constructed, or they don't make sense, or it takes up too much room. Like,
maintenance of
yeah,
them.
yep, or hey, I wanna donate, I'm gonna donate 5 picnic tables to Pride Park. There's no room for that. You can't just put those there. So, like, kind of thinking of that as an example. So if it's something like that, where you're making a donation of trees, something that gets planted, park benches, smaller scale items, that to me becomes a park board's, like, approval. And then that recommendation goes on to city council. We have essentially a checklist of these things have been met.
Mhm.
And then what is that public review process? So does this have a 30-day hearing? Like, does it need to be publicly noticed? You know, what does that look like from a city level? And then if you have something that's a little bit more permanent, like, or again, I wanna build an ice skating rink, and we got grant money, we're a nonprofit organization, we're doing all of this work to build this covered ice skating rink on city land, what does that now look like? And that's a much larger scale project, so again, to me, that goes through our building department as well as planning board. They have a full list of checklists that has to follow and be reviewed. Then it goes to city council, and again, it has to have public hearings in that space too. So, those are kind of like the parameters that I'm visualizing, and this is just me spitballing here. Like, again, this is how I would consider this happening,
Mhm.
but it could be, that's the thing, we don't have the groundwork for this. So it could literally just be council decides, which I don't think that's a good idea, but.
Right, it's involved in the public.
Yeah.
We have to build a system that is scalable and last going forward. And so one of the things I'm seeing like here, like planting trees in public spaces, that is an ordinance that's there that could have been used in this
Mhm.
in this one, but, that one had a change of use that also triggered it. So yeah, just kind of going in there and looking at
where is the city's liability for structures or even an ice rink on city property?
The answer is
If somebody gets hurt.
absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, the
Yeah, I was
city's
thinking,
viewed as the deep pocket,
Mhm.
and therefore, what, is there provisions is there
We're,
any way to
we're,
protect the
we're,
city?
we're covered, we have an insurance policy that covers us.
Right,
But that, to this point, that needs to be part of the conversation, is that there needs to be an evaluation of, does it increase the liability outside, and is it still covered?
Yeah.
when I was using city-owned property, I actually took out an insurance policy that named the city.
And we
as-
still require that as
That's-
part of 960, as part of events.
And that's the other piece too, is 960 covers that for events, but it doesn't necessarily cover it for MOUs, those types of pieces.
Yeah.
I believe a lot of the MOUs do require insurance, but I can't guarantee that because there's so many and not all of them are consistent. So again, that's another concern is where do our MOUs lie? And it might just be that we build this process and then MOUs are now required to follow that process whenever they want to make improvements. to
What
city
happened to
plans.
the because I left for 2 months last year, and there was a big push for standardizing MOUs.
We never got around to that, and that's kind of what I'm bringing it back to right now, is having that standardized
This
process.
Conversation, yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, this is,
another branch.
Kind of a cookie cutter, this is a,
yep, this is your,
Yeah,
like, these are
are-
things that are absolutely required to be in an MOU.
yeah.
And I think that's what we need to have, is those guidelines for this has to happen in every single MOU. And then from there, you can add additional provisions, like, again, I think of the garden club, like, they can have their activities and they can do, like, their plant sale, that can all be detailed within their MOU, but there's other requirements that are absolutely cookie cutter and cannot be exempt. But then you can have other provisions depending on what that looks like. So if it's an MOU, like, and that's what I'm saying, if we create this, and then we create an MOU that is, again, more cookie cutter, it's like, you must follow the process and resolution number, to make any improvements to the space that you are, like, have an MOU with. And then that way, they now have that to refer to whenever they want to make any sort of additions, improvements at certain, and again, that, this resolution will cover that scale of like, okay, they want to plant plants, go for it. Like, that's something that you already have approved within this MOU, but you want to put in a gazebo, that becomes a process. That all make sense? That was a lot.
Within their own MOU, yeah.
Yeah. So,
They go beyond that.
So as we've gone through it, I've written down some notes that I can share with you, like you said, as
Please
a
do.
starting.
mhm.
But Article 8, and it looks like chapter 5, 7, and 8 within Article 8 are
Yep.
right off the top. So,
Mhm.
pre-regulations, I think, kind of fits into that, but Parks and Recreation, chapter 7 is Parks and Recreation, and 8 is use of city-owned property.
Yep.
Those certainly, I mean,
And I mean, realistically, like, with some of the right-of-way trail regulations, like, pretty much, I think that it's important that we read through all of Title VIII,
Title 8, yep.
because there's gonna be stuff within here, and I think we just go through and kind of highlight what we've caught within Title VIII that can help us guide to what those rules need to be.
Baseline, okay.
And then from there, we can have a bigger discussion of, okay, we have all these rules that we already have. We can use this as a reference throughout that whole resolution now, to where it's like refer to Title VIII, whatever number it is. But yeah, having that in place. And do we feel this is a resolution, or is this an ordinance?
Well, if we end up changing this, it's probably gonna be an ordinance.
Well, I'm not planning on changing Title VIII at this point, because again, I have to read through it all.
No, but it's potential to be an ordinance.
I mean, this almost should be a section of Title VIII. Or be included in, where were we?
Like, and it could be an additional chapter underneath,
Exactly, that's
Chapter 8
kind of what I'm
Title VIII.
thinking, like, this is
Yeah.
bigger than just a resolution.
yeah. So, ordinance. So, homework identified that needs to be done before we dive into this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And to Rod's point, we already know Dave's a big fan of fill out the spreadsheet first. What's the problem be solved? Does
Yes.
it solve it? What are the
Yep.
consequences if we don't? What other mechanisms are available?
So I think that's the two homework assignments, reading through Title VIII,
Okay.
and then also, what are we trying to actually, what is the problem identify and how we do wanna fix that? And then that will make it easier for us to kind of create a scope and a lens, and that's how we use that lens throughout any of the process of writing it out. And again, always keeping public input in mind, and that's the other thing too, is just, I really think that public hearing and public notice, and it might be that the public notice is at the expense of the applicant.
Okay?
I mean, again, this is just spitballing ideas while I'm thinking of it.
Yeah.
Because, again, we don't necessarily wanna have a public, what, $600 charge for every time someone wants to add a bench, like something that we're already like just trying to help accommodate.
Yeah,
We don't
good
necessarily want it to
point.
be a city expense
Mhm.
to take donations.
Yeah, that's a good
So,
point.
that's cause I think about that a lot, like especially like with Parks Board, I was on Parks Board for a while. We had a lot of folks that were just wanting to do a lot of good things,
Mhm.
and at the same time, we had to put a lot of guardrails around it because of liability, because of expenses, and because it has to hit a certain code, it has to hit a certain level of expectation as well. We can't just throw stuff into parks and say thank you, like it has to meet a certain criteria,
Mhm.
like specifically, you know, we had folks that were wanting to apply for grants, get solar panels all over the place, and like putting like carports over things, and it's like these carports have to be like rated for snow, it has to be rated for all these different things. So again, that's where I think that approval through, planning board, parks board, the building inspector
Health
before.
and safety, yeah.
Mhm.
Sure.
And then making it basically like, this is your step-by-step, not necessarily application, but, so it's a little bit more clear when people do wanna do stuff, like, this is the process that it's gonna have to take.
Because they have probably, you know, their heart's in it, but
Oh, yeah.
they don't know the behind the
And
scenes.
it's so painful to have
Yeah.
to tell someone, no, we can't do that,
They don't understand why.
and they're just like, but I'm trying to help, I'm like, I hear you, but like, at a certain point, we have to take a bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that will help clear that up for a lot of folks too,
Yeah, that's
and hopefully just make it easier for everybody, to
Mhm.
where we're not having to go back and forth and like, well, maybe we can do that, or, but now we need this, and now we need this, because there's nothing worse than that, when you're going to do something and then you just keep getting more red tape.
good. Yeah.
I want all the red tape to be out there in the first place.
That's good. It's fair to them.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it'll prevent any, ill feelings for somebody who got to do something and somebody else who didn't get to do something, so.
Exactly, yeah.
It'll protect us and protect the community,
Mhm.
and
And I think another
really
thing
well.
too is, the same way that we do it for land use, for events, and, we have to have people sign off on things too. So like specifically, like when the fun run happens, all of the businesses and like all the folks along that route
Uh-huh.
have to sign off on that event saying it's okay. So like if you're trying to add a covered pavilion in Lions Park, who has to sign off on that? Like,
Right.
who are the people that are gonna be looking at it right there, you know?
Yeah, mhm.
So that might also just be something important to remember and include. Okay, I think that's good groundwork. Again, I wanted to keep that fairly open and just broad, so we could start to create a direction.
Agreed.
Anything else on that? Public? No? Mayor? No? Cool.
I think the timeline is just based on, you know, you have significant investment in potential structures coming up
You're not wrong.
because of that grant.
You're not wrong.
You can't, it's gonna have to move along quickly to catch up, or you're just gonna be,
Agreed.
you're gonna be approving a permanent structure, wishing you had
Having this in place.
structure.
Well, again, that's part of the reason I'm
We already
trying
had
to.
to do one kind of an ad hoc, and we did our best guess on how to do it. And I will add that we actually did a second, because we had a park, somebody wanted to donate a park to the dog park. And it was like, okay, if it's a bench, no. We approved it, moved forward. We got a call from the company delivering the bench. They want to bring in the 36 100-pound truck because it's a 3,000-pound concrete bench and it's already done, and it's like, ew. That's, you know, so it's not a pick up and move sort of a thing, so.
Process is good.
The good news is, it's a totally acceptable bench, it's just not gonna move a lot once it's inside.
Which for Red Lodge, that's great, because we have a big problem with moving benches.
I know.
This one won't.
So yeah, I think, again, you're not wrong, and I think the big part of that is let's make sure that we're looking at all the details first, and it'll just make that process faster. Does that make sense?
It's
So-
great that you already know a lot of the baseline and groundwork where you have a lot of great ideas, so to branch from. I'll read
The other
title
thing
eight.
Has somebody already done this?
And that's exactly it, like, that's what we're kind of
Oh,
looking for right
Starting
now.
out with, yeah.
Yep, because again, I'm not about reinventing the wheel if we don't need to, I'm all about making the wheel a little better if possible, so, okay, that's
I think
that.
we're good, yeah.
And we're pretty much at 10:45. Next up, downtown master plan review, the same way that I have been preaching the growth policy, downtown master plan is next up on the list.
Okay.
Oh God, I have that
And-
timeline.
And it's actually coming to, I think we ran the ad.
Did we really all remember? No, because for the public, or the planning board hearing.
Planning board public hearing.
Yep, so, just so you know, and this, again, kind of going back to what I was talking about with growth policy, right now is a really good time to look at that downtown plan, because we're gonna be having the public hearing for the downtown plan July 9th,
Okay.
and that's the best time to be bringing in feedback, not at a council meeting. So that way, they can
Public
actually
hearing,
address
okay.
it at that point. After that public hearing, the plan is to approve that downtown plan with the public, or the planning board on the 23rd. And then at that point, it would come to a public hearing and come to council, I wanna say like 3 meetings later. Just because it's a weird timeline, how it works. It has to be, I can't remember how exactly it is, but so specifically, right now is a really good time to work on the downtown plan and just take a look. It's not as long as the growth policy. It's a little bit, it's a little chippier, like, you know, it's fun, and it specifically just talks, like, again, scope is downtown business, growth, goals of the community. And it's a little bit, again, more fun. There's
And
a
it's-
lot of really bad photos in it, so.
Really?
There's a lot of
Can we
good ones
fix
now,
it?
they've been replaced by ones Chelsea took.
Okay, mine are bad. I was trying to wait till it got a little greener, but I didn't have time.
And this is on the city's website too, and
Yep.
is this one done every 5 years as well, like the capital improvement growth policy?
Oh, this
or-
one?
It's not dictated by
Oh.
state law, so
Okay.
we haven't done it for like 20 years,
Oh,
but
wow.
it could be updated more regularly.
Yeah, and this is a complete rework essentially, because the previous one was so old and out of date.
Yeah,
So this is a complete rework, and one thing that's nice with the downtown plan, this is how we can obtain grants, this is how
Mhm.
we, again, creating that focus for whenever we're doing anything at the planning board level,
Mhm.
just kind of using that as a scope and a direction. That's, to me, one of the big perks of it, and just why it's important to try and include as much as you can.
And to answer your question, what triggered the redoing it this time is that there was grant money that was available.
Okay.
However,
Couldn't get
we've
grant.
double spent that just because it wasn't started efficiently, so.
Is there concern about commercial sprawl to the north in the blighted area that?
That
You're
doesn't,
seeing, you know,
I
one
don't
of the
think there's
options is commercial, but, you know, downtown is, still got areas that,
this one is limited to downtown, so it doesn't impact that. The growth policy is where that would be impacted.
Mhm.
And I do think that there is not a unanimous decision about commercial sprawl into the URD. That is evident through growth policy conversations and also through URD conversations.
Yeah. And again, I don't think there's necessarily as much, there's some people that are concerned, there's some people that are optimistic. So, and I think that the consensus, though, where people are on the same page, is keeping it attractive, keeping it functional, preserving our downtown as our historic downtown and not competing with that. But that doesn't necessarily say you don't get to have a restaurant there because our restaurants are downtown. 'Cause that's some people's opinion and not mine. So,
And just going back to 96,
mhm,
we got a new post office, we got updated grocery store, we got a new bank,
mhm,
we're all in 96. And there was a move to put all of that north,
right.
and the community said, no, we want to maintain.
And that is still present within that plan.
Mm.
So that was one thing that came out of a lot of the downtown discussions, was maintaining that sense of vibrancy for not just, like, we don't want it to become a tourist trap downtown. We do want to maintain public services and your daily errands, the insurance companies, the grocery stores, the post office, the civil, or the civic offices, specifically to create that sense of community. So that is something that is still very prevalent throughout that downtown
I think
plan.
the hardware store was also part
That
of
sounds about right.
In 96.
It
Yeah.
just- Instead of those core daily businesses moving out of the
Yeah.
center of the community,
Mhm.
they were kept in the center of the community.
And that was a big part of it, is they want to keep that as a focus for our downtown. Again, it's not just going to become T-shirts, shops, and restaurants. So, that was a very large focus of the downtown conversation. And I think it's a really a good perspective to bring to the table, because it's not something you always hear. So,
How long have, you and the planning board been working on it?
oh, this has been, what, 18 months?
Yeah, it started a couple of years ago, and then basically it got tabled while they did the growth policy, and then after growth policy, they went to downtown master plan.
Okay,
There was a
thank you.
little bit of, confusing elements because they were both happening at the same time that kind of led into conversations about, and so they kind of compartmentalized them to get them done and out. And
Okay,
in retrospect, doing them again, I wouldn't do them one after the other, or I wouldn't do them at the same time, I would do them one after the other.
Okay,
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we ultimately did here to get them out.
Yeah.
growth policy and then downtown.
Yeah, and a lot of the downtown plan was actually started by like a previous planning director, and so there was a lot of retweaking to the downtown plan. But I think it's in a much more positive light than it was when we started.
Good.
So yes, please take a look at that. That planning board meeting is after our next council meeting. So what I would recommend, and I did this with Cinta and Sandy for the growth policy, is if you do have any recommendations, you can bring them to this land use and planning meeting on the 8th.
Okay.
And then that, like, or type them up and send them to the planning board.
I had ninth written down,
This
but-
council, the land use and planning meeting is the 8th.
Okay.
The planning board meeting is the 9th. So we can have that discussion here, and then, but I do recommend
Right,
typing it up and
okay.
sending it to Al, for the planning board's review. So that way he can get it to everybody before even that hearing. So if there is anything, and again, this can be your own personal interest, things that you hear from other people, constituents, like, just, it's nice to have that feedback earlier than later.
Yes, good, yeah, good point to be mindful of.
And I will also emphasize that tonight at, council. So, I think that's pretty much it. I think we have a big priority on our plate and a big project on our plate. And then from that, we're gonna have other stuff that comes from zoning. Again, last time we went through the timelines, we're pretty much scheduled till the end of the year, so.
Sounds like it.
Um,
On the planning board meetings, anybody can attend
Yeah.
those? Okay,
Yep.
all right, thank you.
they're not quite as like open as these meetings, they're a
Okay.
little bit more structured, but, there are public hearings, and you get to sit through and really see the work on it,
What they're
because
doing, okay.
it is very much a work session, to where you're going through, and it's line by line. Like, they take very high detail, you do get into some higher, more elevated conversations,
Okay.
but it's very detailed.
What time were those? Or,
5:30 on
5:30.
Wednesdays,
On the second and fourth Wednesday.
okay, thank you.
Generally,
the day after.
10 months out of the year, that's the day after city council meetings. But occasionally, if the first is on a Wednesday, then it's not on the same week as council.
It messes my whole brain up when that happens.
Okay,
But most of the
We'll wait for
time,
the
you think of it
minute.
as the Wednesday following us. It's
Okay.
just, if the month starts on a Wednesday, it doesn't work, but there's like
Okay,
2 times a year where it.
awesome, okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? If you do a great job of wrapping this up.
Public comment, look at them,
I did, I looked at them, and then I looked at you, and then I looked back.
I thought
Oh.
I've run out of comments.
He's commented out.
Oh, no. Rod, I'll give you 2 minutes, I know you've got more in you.
Did you say the magic words?
We're adjourned.
Thank you for